Conducting a podcast interview is a skill that takes some time to learn, quite honestly. And if you're new at it, you're probably not going to be good at it right away, and that's okay. You'll figure it out. So in this video, I want to help you figure it out. I'm going to share some tips to help you know how to conduct a great podcast interview.
This is the place for podcasters.
Hey everyone, it's Brian here from Summit City Studios, and this is the place for podcasters. On this channel, we talk about tips, tools, and tech to help you create a better podcast. And today, I want to talk again about the podcast interview, because there's a skill and an art to the interview that I want to help you try and figure out. So today, I want to share a couple tips that I've learned to help you conduct a great interview. So let's jump into it. The first thing you're going to want to do is get to the content as quickly as possible. You don't want to skip an introduction of the guest that you're interviewing, because people need to know who this person is, where they come from, what their background is, maybe even what they're there to talk about, right? They need to know the expertise that this person is bringing and why you're even bringing them on your podcast. But if you do too much of that up front, people are going to lose interest because they tuned in to listen or to watch the podcast that you're doing because of that thing that you titled it, that they're there to hear about. And if you wait 20 minutes to get to that thing that they tuned in to listen to, you've already lost your listener. So give a brief introduction and get to the content as quickly as possible. Now, the second thing I want to talk about is learning how to ask good questions. Because if you're a good question asker, you're going to probably be a good interviewer. Now, what's a good question? That's a good question. A good question is a question that elicits more than a one-word response. So if you're asking questions and you're not getting much from your guests because all they're giving you is a yes or a no answer, maybe you're not asking good questions. Good questions demonstrate at least a cursory knowledge of the subject matter that you're talking about, and demonstrate genuine curiosity in wanting to know the answer to the question that you're actually asking. So good questions are questions that end with sometimes a period and not a question mark. Questions like, tell me more about. Share that part of your story for our listeners. Now, if you're asking good questions, the next thing you're going to want to do is be a good listener. Being a good listener is not just hearing what they're saying and being ready to move on to the next question. Being a good listener is actually processing what your guest is saying as they're saying it and being prepared to ask a follow-up question. So sometimes I'll actually have a notebook in front of me and I'll jot some things down that I want to actually come back to or maybe ask right then and there in the moment. Good follow-up questions help further the conversation. So be a good listener so that you can ask good follow-up questions. Now, this next one can be maybe a little bit more difficult depending on who you are and what your personality is. And that is the ability to steer a conversation that is getting sidetracked a little bit. You know, we've had those conversations, and you've probably had plenty of conversations, I know I have, that we get talking about something and one question leads to another question, leads to another thought that triggers something else. And suddenly the conversation that we're trying to have has gone from here to somewhere way over here, and we have no idea how it got there or how to bring it back. To be a good interview host, you're going to have to learn the skill to navigate that conversation, to ask a good question, and maybe even to just straight up cut off your guests to get back to the questions that you have mapped out and that your listeners are there to hear more about. And finally, this last one is incredibly important, and that is just that you need to know where you're going to land when that conversation is over. There's nothing worse. Well, there's probably a lot of things worse, but it's really bad when a conversation ends suddenly and awkwardly and really abruptly. It leaves you and your guests look at each other going, well, I guess that was it. And it leaves your listeners kind of confused about what just happened, how this conversation ended so quickly. So you're going to want to map out, again, what you want to talk about. You can go on some detours. You are developing the skill to steer that conversation back, but you can't steer the conversation back if you don't know where you want to land at the end of that conversation. So be sure to map it out, know where you're going so that you can bring it all back there. So those are just a handful of things that I think are really important for you to know as you get into the podcasting world so that you can conduct great interviews. But maybe you've been doing this for a while as well, and you have a tip to share with everyone else about how to conduct a great interview. So if you do, leave it in the comments below. I would love to read it, and I'd love to be able to share it with the community that's watching this video. These skills really do take some time to master, so don't expect to be a pro right away. But do practice and do pay attention to how you may or may not be improving with each and every episode. Evaluation is key to growth in any area of our lives, and being a better podcast host and a better interviewer is no different. And the way to evaluate yourself is to go back and listen to your past episodes. Consider what follow-up questions you might ask now than you did then. Consider how you might steer the conversation and how you might have been a better listener now than you were on that episode. And as painful as it may be to listen to our past selves, it's important that we do so that we can continue to move forward and get just a little bit better with each and every interview that we do. And if you've stuck around this long, be sure to hit that like button, consider subscribing to this channel, and share this video with all of your podcasting friends. And I'll see you in the next one. If you're a new podcaster, a podcaster looking to level up your game, or maybe looking for someone to edit and produce the podcast that you're already recording, visit me at summitcitystudios.com to find out how I can help you create a great podcast.